Before we begin, I invite you to gently close your ears and focus on what remains when all external sounds fade away. It's like sitting in a quiet room, and after a while, you notice a subtle ringing or hum beneath the silence. If you listen closely, you'll start to experience this soft, constant presence, something that feels like the very fabric of reality itself. In quantum physics, it's said that everything is connected at the most fundamental level, and that everything we see is just a manifestation of deeper, unseen energy. What you are hearing, or rather feeling, is that same energy, that same field of potential. This subtle ringing is what we call the sound of silence. It's not just an abstract concept or some external force. It's the very essence of you. Everything we discuss in this session, and the ones to come, will be about this sound of silence. It is not something separate or different from you. It is you. This exploration is about realizing that the sound of silence is your own inner being, your most fundamental nature, the stillness from which all life arises. You are that, the very presence behind everything. In the beginning, we have to understand that everything in the universe, from the smallest to the largest phenomena, is transient. Take bubbles as an example. They form within the realm of time, lasting for only a short duration, seconds, minutes, or hours. Yet the water from which these bubbles arise is timeless, as water itself is not bound by time. Waves, too, emerge from water. And what is water made of? It's made of air, and if we look deeper, we find that air is composed of space. But what is space made of? Space, in essence, exists within me. When I ponder on the concept of space, I realize that it doesn't require the body to be conscious of it. If there is no body, no form, there is no awareness of space. The question of when space is born arises naturally, but it's not about when it exists. It is always present. Space exists even when I'm in deep sleep, because the body, which is a form within space, continues to exist within it. The key point here is that the existence of space or anything else doesn't depend on my perception of it. It exists independently, and yet the moment I open my eyes, I become aware of it. When I'm asleep, I'm not conscious of space, but that doesn't mean it ceases to exist. The non-existence of space is equal to my lack of consciousness in deep sleep. The space remains, even though my awareness is absent. When I connect this realization to the broader perspective, I realize that it's not just about the space around me or the body that I inhabit. The awareness of space is universal. This sense of existence that I feel, the one that never dies, is intrinsic to consciousness itself. Life, the essence of all existence, continues even when one body ceases to function. If one body dies, other forms still persist, for the feeling of existence does not disappear with the death of one form. I, as consciousness, am not limited to any one form. I exist through various forms. The forms may come and go, but the essence of life, the feeling of existence, remains constant. This universal existence is the sound of silence, the supreme source that transcends time, forms, and matter. Now, the mind, which is a product of the feeling of existence, is the software that attaches itself to this awareness. This mind, tied to the senses, continuously triggers thoughts and emotions the moment I perceive something. If I see a tree, for example, my mind instantly identifies it as a tree, and from that identification, countless thoughts, memories, and reactions arise. This process is automatic. As soon as the mind registers something, it triggers an emotional response, which in turn influences actions and reactions. But what happens if there is no feeling of existence? Then there is nothing, no thoughts, no mind, no reactions. The feeling of existence is the foundation upon which everything else rests. It is this feeling of existence that gives rise to the mind, and yet the mind is not truly the essence of who I am. The mind is a construct that attaches itself to this feeling, this awareness. It is a software that operates based on the sensations the body experiences. But when I think about it, I realize that the mind is not me. It is simply a tool, a mechanism through which experiences are processed. If this software were to disappear, if the mind were no more, what would remain? It is the pure consciousness that exists beyond the mind. This consciousness is eternal and unchanging, and it is not subject to the limitations of the mind. The fear that arises in many individuals is a fear of the mind being destroyed. But in reality, what does the destruction of the mind mean? The mind is not the true self. The true self is the consciousness, the feeling of existence that is not dependent on the mind or the body. The mind, with all its attachments and fears, is a creation of the senses. It is like a mirror reflecting the outer world, but the reflection is not the true essence. The mind may cease to function, but I, as consciousness, remain unaffected. This is where the realization of the sound of silence comes into play, the silence that exists beyond all thoughts, beyond all sensations, and beyond all forms. This silence is the ultimate reality, the supreme source from which everything emerges. The mind creates attachments, and these attachments give rise to fears. Fear arises when I become attached to a particular form or experience. But if I realize that I am not the form, that I am not the mind, then I can no longer be afraid. Fear can only exist as long as there is attachment, but when I detach from the forms, from the mind, and from the body, I discover a state of pure awareness, consciousness without attachment. In deep sleep, for instance, there is no mind functioning, no thoughts, and yet I continue to exist. In that state, there is no suffering, no sorrow, no fear. There is simply existence. This is the essence of life itself, the feeling of existence that transcends all forms and thoughts. In deep sleep, the mind is inactive, but the consciousness remains. There is no suffering in the state of pure awareness because there is no mind to generate suffering. The mind, with all its thoughts and fears, is the source of suffering. But when the mind is absent, there is peace. The newborn baby provides a perfect example of this. A newborn has not yet developed a mind in the way that adults have. The baby experiences sensations, pain, hunger, thirst, but it does not have the thoughts that we associate with suffering. Pain, for example, serves a purpose in the body. It alerts the body to a problem and signals that action is needed. But pain does not necessarily result in suffering. It is the mind that interprets pain and turns it into suffering. The newborn, without the developed mind, does not suffer. It simply experiences sensations without attaching any meaning to them. This is the state of pure consciousness, the feeling of existence without the distortions of the mind. In conclusion, the feeling of existence is the foundation of all that is. It is the sound of silence, the supreme source of the universe, from which everything emerges and into which everything returns. The mind and its attachments are like clouds passing through this vast expanse of silence. The essence of who I am is not the mind, not the body, and not the forms that arise in the world. I am the consciousness, the feeling of existence, and this is eternal. Through this realization, I can transcend the limitations of the mind and experience the true peace that lies in the sound of silence.